Louisiana. Meteorologist Dave Baker here on a Wednesday. That was River Changes by Freedom Trail Studio. That's all part of the YouTube free music collection. I love that song because it reminds me of something that would be played at the skating rink maybe when I was a kid. But this is Let's Talk Tropics on a Wednesday. It's a hot one here in Lafayette. Got a little action that's out there. National Hurricane Center kind of upping a little bit of a chance of something maybe over the Gulf. And we're going to revisit a hurricane from almost 18 years ago that struck the northern coast of Texas, kind of up around High Island, Texas. And the reason I'm going to talk about that is kind of tie it in with some of these waves that we've had go over the northern part of the Gulf that didn't form. But just to kind of show you why sometimes in the meteorology world, we do tend to pay a lot more closer attention because things can fire up fairly quickly. Not trying to scare you, but we know that if we miss something, folks are going to be a little mad about that. So let's get outside real quick. Partly cloudy skies, 90 degrees here in the hub city. It's 100 with the feels like temperature, that heat index. And that heat index could go as high as 110 later today. So we do have a heat advisory in effect. Dew point 75, humidity 63%, winds north at 3, and the pressure is at 30.08. And you can see outside of that giant wasp or hornet that's there guarding the I-10 at the I-49, everything else seems to be moving along just fine there under partly to mostly sunny skies. Very, very hot. And there really isn't a whole lot of rain on the radar, at least locally. But you can see there's some rain in the offshore waters there, southeast of Louisiana, some of those even south of Vermilion Bay. Couple of showers getting their way over to around Grand Isle. And then we've got some rain there along the Alabama Gulf Coast. Let me just pull up the Lake Charles radar, just see if there's anything locally. Looks like the sea breeze is about ready to get going, but we've got a pretty good ridge of high pressure aloft. So as that starts to push its way farther toward the north, I don't see a whole lot of thunderstorm activity that's going to be developing along that a little bit later on this afternoon. But you can also see that we do have those rains that extend farther toward the east, and we're talking about some tropical wave or a tropical type of low that's still over the Atlantic or perhaps maybe over the coast of Florida now that's going to be drifting off toward the west. We're going to get to that in just a little bit. But if you want to do some boating, looking all right. Winds are going to be light out of the west at 5 to 10 knots, and seas running about 1 to 3 feet. Some gorgeous weather there. A little more cloud cover, though, over toward Panama City Beach. Orange Beach, again, this is looking off toward the east, so you can see some of the clouds that are coming in there from Florida. And then not looking too bad here at Dauphin Island, looking off toward the southeast there. So you can see some thunderheads off in the distance. That's some of that shower and thunderstorm activity. Unfortunately, Cocodree's cameras are down again. So we're going to just shoot our way over toward Galveston, around Bayou Vista area there in Texas. You can see it's fair and very warm, moving across portions of southeast Texas. So let's look at the big picture here. And there's a lot to talk about, especially here on the U.S. satellite. So we've got this area of rain that's pulling out here, but that's not really any what we're going to be talking about when it comes to tropical weather. There's a little bit more of a low that's maybe right about in that particular area. And then you got more of an upper low that's out here over the Bahamas. So remember, all the weather's kind of tied together. So these are going to be running in tandem. And then we've got some troughs that are moving across the northern part of the country. And as those move on by, that can sometimes tug something a little bit farther toward the north. So before we get to that, let me just go over Central America and some of the other tropical areas first of all. And on the bottom of an upper low, you can see some high, thin cloudiness there off toward the west of Jamaica, but east of the Yucatan Peninsula. And we still have some showers and some heavier downpours over Panama and Costa Rica. Part of that is due to an old tropical wave that's continuing to move on toward the west. Got some showers south of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. We've also got some rains over the Windward and Leeward Islands. That's all part of a tropical wave, or what was disturbance 94L just a couple of days ago. And then farther out in the Atlantic, we do have a number of tropical waves out there. A couple of them are looking fairly strong. We've got a very strong one that's still going to be rolling off the African coast. Some of the models are trying to pick up on that, but we are starting to get closer and closer to the month of August, and I would expect more of these tropical waves to hold on or perhaps develop into tropical systems as we go down the road. So nothing out in the Atlantic, but we're still watching this area here that's off the Florida coast that's going to be drifting its way into the northern Gulf. Gulf. If it goes a little farther to the south and stays over the water, it might have a chance. If it does what 93L did last weekend, the bulk of the energy stayed over land, so it became more of a rainmaker that time around. So this is what we're going to be looking at as far as the Gulf water. So again, there's a number of things that are coming together. We've got the showers and thunderstorms that have just kind of blown off from an old front that was over northern Florida and southern Georgia over the course of the day yesterday. So you're seeing a lot of that now starting to push here into the northern part of the Gulf. So that's what this is right here. So this is really not what we're going to be talking about when it comes to any kind of a tropical disturbance. This is more of the leading edge of the tropical moisture coming in. But there's a huge ridge of high pressure out here. So everything's just kind of stopping right over the Acadiana area when it comes to any convection. So what we're seeing more there is just some of the high, thin clouds starting to work in our area. But if we look closely, a front that came off the Carolina coast has left kind of a disorganized area of showers and thunderstorms here over the East Coast, or maybe even a little bit farther to the west here into portions of Georgia. So let's just say there's a bit of a low right in that area. And the forecast drags it off toward the southwest, which could put it into the northern part of the Gulf. And part of that is this upper low that we've been talking about for a number of days here over the Bahamas. You see that counterclockwise spin. So this is going to be rolling kind of in tandem off toward the west, along with this bit of a low that's out here perhaps over northern Florida. So with that counterclockwise rotation right there, that is what should shove that low off toward the southwest and push it into the Gulf. So again, that's kind of how all of the different weather patterns go together. So let's see what the models are saying. And again, I'm going to show you the entire North Atlantic here and all of the development zones because these models are starting to edge their way into August. Sometimes we can see a little early on if there's going to be anything firing up out over the Atlantic Ocean or perhaps over into the Caribbean. But we are going to zoom in on the Gulf waters to talk more about that wave or perhaps a tropical disturbance kind of moving off toward the west. And you can follow along with the date that's there at the top, just to the east, just to the right of where it says the latest GFS model. You can see the valid time there. And as we start here as you can see, this goes into the early part of August. Going to go ahead and let it start over there. And you see that moisture kind of rolling westward along the Gulf Coast. Now, the GFS doesn't really show anything developing there, but if you want to pay attention to the latter frames here, you start looking out here in middle part of the Atlantic Ocean, you get some of those tropical waves kind of working off toward the west. Right now, it's not really showing maybe a couple of blips there of a low pressure area, but it's just an indication that as we go into August that things are going to start to get more active. Euro model also showing some lows starting to make their way across the Atlantic and maybe one developing there over the central Atlantic near Bermuda. And as far as locally, when this goes ahead and resets here, we're going to see some of that tropical moisture. And we're at 27th, 28th there. So we're going to let this go ahead and reset. And what we're going to see is that tropical moisture kind of working its way off toward the west. So there's the reset there. And you see the showers kind of drifting off toward the west. Rather, there's the reset, and it is drifting off to the west. You see a little rotation maybe there along the northern Gulf Coast, but generally the Euro is showing more of a rainmaker. Canadian model has a little bit of a blip of low pressure off the coast of Louisiana here in the next few days, and then farther out in the Caribbean and in the Atlantic. It's not showing a whole lot, but I was reading the New Orleans National Weather Service discussion earlier this morning, and after 93L passed by, and then this disturbance is going to work on by, they were discussing the possibility of yet another one developing east of Florida and working westward to hit us for the first weekend in August. How would you like that? So there's going to be a number of these tropical waves kind of moving through the Bahamas and then kind of drifting off to the west. Right now, there's more of an upper low over the Bahamas and more of a surface feature over Georgia or Florida. So the icon is also still showing a bit of a low pressure area, and it's been the more aggressive model out of the four global models we'd like to look at. So again, we'll just kind of zoom in on the Gulf Coast, and we'll stop things there for Friday morning. So you see we've got a lot of moisture out here, but You don't really see any kind of circulate or any kind of circulation or any kind of a low pressure area. So at this point, the GFS is not calling for any kind of a storm. Euro kind of looks a little bit more interesting. Maybe it's going to start to bite and perhaps get a low pressure area develop there south of Louisiana. Canadian model, we stopped this also on Friday morning. You see a 1013 low there right off the coast. So maybe there's an indication that there's some development there. And then the icon has been calling for a tropical depression pretty much for the last week or so. And it's showing a 1012 low there. So possibly we could see some kind of a tropical depression. So right now, GFS, Euro, and Canadian are not showing a storm, but the icon is still forecasting a depression. So we can't completely rule this out. But I did want to go to some of the high resolution models because this is where things get a little more interesting. And these higher resolution models are a little bit more of a short range. We're not really taking into consideration as much of some of the global data, but this is the HRRR from the 12Z because at 0, 6, 12, and 18Z, the HRRR goes out 48 hours. All the rest of the time, it just goes out 18. So it's a short range model, but you see as we kind of roll this back and forth, this is, let's see, this is early morning Thursday, and then we start to roll our way into Friday. And then as we get to the early morning hours of Friday, you see that little bit of a low there. So HRRR is trying to pick up on something. It's not definitive, but it is trying to try to catch something there. So let's use the NAM. This is a North American model based on the GFS. And again, I'm going to roll it back here to about Thursday morning. So this would be tomorrow morning. And then as we roll this very slowly, you go over and you get into Friday morning and occasionally see a little blip there of a low pressure area moving off toward the west. So maybe some of our higher resolution models are trying to pick up on something. At this point, it doesn't look like it's anything too interesting, and it doesn't look like it's anything too strong. Some of our AI models that are blended models are also showing kind of a little bit of a low pressure area out there. And even in some of our ensemble models, if we take the lower dynamics and we just go the low pressure areas there, and you can see there's a little bit of a trough kind of developing there along the Louisiana coast. So a little bit of a drift and then off toward the southwest. So again, you can't rule out that nothing's going to happen. So here's why we decide to kind of focus on these, even though there's a really good chance this isn't going to develop. This is the reason why you really still need to pay attention because the water temperatures over the northern Gulf are extreme. And it's not going to take a lot to get something going when you've got water temperatures this hot. At the same time, you've got some higher tropical cyclone heat content that's out there, which is basically a measure of the water temperatures below the surface. And the deeper that 80-degree water goes, the redder or darker brown is what shows up on this map. Now, the Caribbean is really the hot spot there, but the eastern part of the Gulf also has some moderate to high heat potential there. So that is part of the reason why we're getting a little bit more concerned and why you can't really let your guard down, especially this time of the year. Wind shear is a little high, but it is going to weaken by Thursday evening and going into the early part of Friday. Right there where some of our high resolution, shorter range models are trying to develop something. So again, I know that a lot of meteorologists, including myself, we took some heat because nothing developed out of 93L. Rainfall totals, I know there were some people that were complaining, but I don't feel like I have to apologize to someone whose house didn't flood. You should be thankful for that. But there were areas that picked up over a foot of rain. And on average, I think most of Acadiana got about 3 to 6, which is what most meteorologists, including myself, were forecasting. But back in 2007, we had Hurricane Umberto. And I know probably most of you don't even remember this one because it was so short-lived. So back in September of 2007, we had a cluster of thunderstorms. It was kind of off the Texas coast, maybe a little bit of a trough of low pressure. But this particular system developed so quickly that it went from a 30-mile-per-hour low pressure area to a 90-mile-per-hour hurricane within 24 hours. So people that live there along the Bolivar Peninsula going up to about High Island, Texas, literally had less than 24 hours notice. And for that to happen like that, it gets a little bit unnerving because that just gives you no time, and a lot of folks will dismiss that, just like they were dismissing 93L and whatever this, if it gets a tropical designation, drifting off toward the west, is part of the reason why you don't want to let your guard down, because these things can whip up pretty quickly. It's happened several times. I've seen it happen a number of times in my career, and there's some that are even older than that. But Umberto is really the one, kind of that classroom study that went from nothing to a category 1, almost a category 2 hurricane by the time it made landfall. And was about $15 million worth of damage there in portions of Texas. So never let your guard down, especially as we start to get into the heart of the hurricane season. Now, the Global Tropics Hazard Outlook came out yesterday. This is the new edition. So it is showing some action, perhaps along the Gulf Coast or the East Coast. That's kind of like what the Weather Service over in New Orleans was talking about earlier this morning. But I am a little more surprised that there's not more blips out over the Caribbean or the Central Atlantic, because there's a number of tropical waves that are going to be moving through. And when you get these moving across, especially the western part of the Caribbean, those can intensify in a pretty short period of time. And we're now down to just a little over a week before we hit August. And you can see that pretty much most of the Atlantic basin is open for business once we get into August. And you get a lot of activity there in the western Atlantic, the northern Caribbean, and then right off the East Coast. But the Gulf Coast sees its share of action during the month of August, as we all know, and it gets even worse as we go into September. So always be on guard, even when we got these very disorganized low pressure areas drifting off toward the southwest. Sometimes, I know it's very rare, but sometimes those can intensify quickly. And, you can be mad about maybe not getting as much rain as that was expected, but I'm sure you're going to be a little more pissed if we don't actually catch something and a hurricane comes in within 12 hours or something like that. So, kind of go easy a little bit on that, because weather is definitely not an exact science. And there are so many different things with the hundreds of tropical systems that I've forecast in the last 3 decades. There is not one single one of these tropical systems that is the same. It has no siblings. It has no twins. That's for sure. Well, I hope you enjoy Let's Talk Tropics. If you wouldn't mind, give it a like and subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. You can also let's go back here. You can also hear my forecasts on Big 102.1, Planet Radio 106.7, and Freedom 95.1. And of course, please follow my social media pages on Facebook and X for any updates in between forecasts. And also, thanks to everyone who has subscribed, plus my new subscribers here on Acadiana Weather Today. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you on Thursday.